Hello, and welcome back to Fintech Recap. My name is Alex Johnson. I am the creator of Fintech Takes, and I am joined by my friend, briefer of Congress people, listener of bankruptcy calls, reporter of the most interesting/exhausting story in financial services these days, the publisher of Fintech Business Weekly, Jason Mikula. Jason, hello.
Hey, I am physically and mentally exhausted, but happy to be talking to you.
Well, I am delighted to have you. We promise at some point we'll give you a break on all of the stuff that's been happening, but we appreciate, I think I speak for everyone in the ecosystem, all of the hard work that you've been putting into your reporting lately. We will start there, I think, and then we'll get into hopefully some other stories, maybe some things that you haven't gotten a chance to talk as much about. So I promise I will give you a little bit of a break, but before we do that, all right, let me put on my official narration voice. Are you ready? Previously on BaaS Island, Synapse and Tabapay had an agreement. Everyone was going to walk away more or less intact. It was only a month ago, and then stuff happened. We go to our embedded reporter, Jason Mikula, on BaaS Island. Jason, are you okay?
Yeah, I'm surviving, and I guess we've really committed to the bit, and now we have to take it to the very most brutal end. And I feel
We
bad
really
for anyone, any new subscribers who do. I don't even remember the origin of this bit.
I don't either.
But yeah, I mean, to catch folks up, the last time Alex and I talked, which was only a month ago,
Yeah.
The Tabapay deal to acquire Synapse's assets through this Chapter 11 process was moving forward. One of the most critical preconditions of that deal was that Synapse resolve and agree to a settlement with Evolve Bank and Trust, including Evolve fully funding any sort of gaps or missing FBO funds or end user funds. Per the court hearings and court filings, Evolve took some time to do some analysis and basically came back and said, nope, all good. These are fully funded. And that was sort of the impetus for Tabapay walking away from this deal. So at that point, you have Synapse already has filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy. You kind of can't unring that bell. Tabapay washed its hands of the deal. There was chatter, in some of the court hearings of other potential acquirers or folks interested in buying assets. I found that a bit difficult to believe that any of that could come together quickly enough to sort of stem off the disaster that we now have. And Synapse sort of careened to this uncontrolled bankruptcy. So I mean, sort of part one, which is where do we stand now, or what's the latest that's happened? Synapse and Evolve are sort of the two highest profile players in this saga. In advance of the most recent court hearing, both parties made filings. Synapse basically says that Evolve should be holding approximately 150 million of end user funds, but that Evolve only has about 100 million. So a gap of approximately $50 million. Evolve says Synapse's ledgers can't be trusted, and in its filing gave some examples of during this freeze period where on May 11th, Evolve, for all intents and purposes, effectively pulled the plug on all of Synapse programs, even the ones that are sort of brokerage programs where the funds are held in AMG, because Evolve provides the debit card issuing and the RDFI, the ACH, some of the ACH processing. So without Evolve sort of in the mix, sort of nothing is moving. Evolve provided some documentation or some assertions in its filing, basically saying Synapse's ledgers not only don't match money movement in and out of the accounts, but literally were like the opposite direction. Like Synapse's ledger said the number should have been going up, and the actual money movement in and out of accounts had a net balance going down, right? So there's a clear lack of faith on Evolve's part, and Lineage's attorney also voiced this in the hearings, basically that they don't believe the data Synapse is providing is accurate. Regarding that 50 million, it appears to be Synapse's assertion that at least some of that gap was caused by another player in this drama, Mercury. So Synapse has alleged that when Mercury transitioned off of Synapse, it moved something around $30 million of customer money that it should not have. And then an additional approximately $17 million were debited from Synapse FBO accounts that should not have been debited from those accounts. So combined about 47-ish million. Mercury has denied those allegations.
Yeah.
So the last court hearing, a Chapter 11 trustee was appointed. For people who are not experts in bankruptcy, which include me, Chapter 11 trustee basically means the existing management team is no longer calling the shots. You sort of attempt to bring in an independent third party who can act as a fiduciary. Caveat being fiduciary whose mandate, as I understand it, is to maximize return for creditors. And in this case,
Right.
who are those creditors? The big two are Triple Point Capital and Silicon Valley Bank. So their role here is they lent money to Synapse at some point. I think it combined around 10 million, and they would like to have their money back. They are first in line to get that money back from the estate. Right. So not customer funds, but any assets of the Synapse estate that still exist. They're sort of first dibs to get that back. The trustee that was appointed is none other than former FDIC chair Yelena McWilliams. Trump appointee, she served only about 4 years of her 6-year term after getting into a power struggle. I believe it was over something related to the Bank Merger Act or bank merger policy with the 3 other sitting members of the FDIC board, which were at the time and still are, Rohit Chopra, who's the director of the CFPB, Michael Su, who's the acting comptroller of the currency, and Martin Grunberg, who still remains the current chair of the FDIC. Then at the time he was a board member. So some interesting backstory there. I'm just going to continue this monologue. As far as what's next, I mean, I have a very difficult time imagining any end users are going to see money returned to them before there's been a full reconciliation of the records that Synapse has and the amount that the actual customer funds that are sitting at or should be sitting at Evolve, AMG Trust, American, and Lineage. I have seen some chatter from some copper users that they were told to expect funds return potentially in the next few days. That's unconfirmed, and frankly, I just don't see how that's possible without actually going through all of the books and records and doing that reconciliation to the actual money sitting in those FBOs.
Right.
And then the big question is sort of like, what regulatory repercussions might there be in the near term for these specific players? And then what might the longer term implications for, BaaS middleware, partner banking, and consumer facing fintech? What are those implications going to be? I'm literally out of breath from doing that. So Alex, what are you making of this entire, to quote the judge, hot mess?
Oh my gosh. Well, that was a wonderful summary. You should have seen, listeners won't know this, but Jason had this just like pained expression on his face as he was going through it. He was getting like older in real time as I was watching him recap that. That was quite a performance. So thank you, Jason. I appreciate that. No, it's a good summary. I think in the short term, from a regulatory perspective, I mean, obviously, I think it was the Fed who chimed in as Evolve's regulator, saying in one of the hearings, or having provided a statement in one of the hearings, that this is really nothing to do with them, which was disheartening, I think, to the judge and to others who were listening to that call. But it is, I think, and this is something you and I and other bank nerds have been talking about offline, it is relatively consistent with just the way this model works, right? I mean, none of these middleware providers or fintech companies are directly supervised by regulators. And, to your point about the stage in the process when there was that sort of breakdown and cutting off access between Evolve and Synapse, Evolve has a regulatory requirement to not sort of facilitate banking activity that it doesn't see, or that it can't reconcile or can't monitor, right? And so there is, I think, a very clear line in the sand from a regulatory perspective in terms of what bank supervisory organizations can do as it relates to this whole mess. Now, what's going to come out of this? I mean, I don't know. I think that prior to all of this melting down, there was a feeling among lots of folks in the banking as a service space, I'm sure you came across this every single day when you were talking to folks, that prudential regulators, so the OCC, the Fed, the FDIC, were coming down really hard, unfairly so, on BaaS banks, right? And I think a good sort of maybe example of what other folks in the ecosystem found frustrating was Blue Ridge Bank getting 2 separate consent orders within the span of like 18 months for roughly the same set of problems that were already identified in the first consent order. And it felt, I think, a little bit to people in the ecosystem like the OCC and others were more just sort of smacking around banks to make a point, more so than they were really identifying massive gaps in AML, BSA issues that needed to be remediated. Otherwise, there'd be some massive safety and soundness issues. So it was seen, I think, by the ecosystem as regulators using relatively narrow avenues at their disposal to make a larger point about we don't like this business, or in particular, we don't like certain models within this business. Obviously, the indirect sort of middleware model being the one that I think regulators were most concerned with. I guess from a regulatory perspective, you could say they had a point. I think this probably was one of the things that when they looked at how this worked, and to borrow language that Michael Su used, I think in his speech, the sort of supply chain of fintech and banking as a service, if it breaks, something catastrophic could happen. And this, I think, is a fairly good example of that type of catastrophe. So coming out of this, I mean, I wouldn't expect in the very short term that exams for BaaS banks are going to get any easier. I would think that there would still be a tremendous amount of concern around any bank that's still sort of toying with more of an indirect versus direct model. And obviously, I mean, direct is our favorite word, Jason, because there's lots of different shades of meaning there. One of the things I'm really curious about is what is the impact of all of this on other middleware providers, all of whom have been pivoting to more of a bank-centric approach, more of a we directly enable banks to indirectly work with fintech companies, but in a direct way with no program management. And that, I think, will be a really interesting challenge to navigate for those middleware providers and for banks, because, one of the things that's come up a lot, and I feel a little bad because I kind of kickstarted this conversation in my newsletter, but, the idea of like FBO accounts, which sort of sit at the center of a lot of the challenges that have been happening, how much money is in the FBO account, how much money should be in the FBO account, all of these reconciliation challenges. I think I sort of come down more on the side of maybe FBO accounts aren't the right tool to be used here, but I've gotten a lot of pushback on that from folks in the ecosystem who say, well, any of the banks we want to work with, their core systems are unworkable for us. Like, we can't build on their core systems. They're not flexible enough. They don't enable the types of experiences we want. They're really expensive to use if we do it on a per account basis. So FBO accounts are like the only functional way forward. And what really matters is we need to have better ledgers and better reconciliation processes. And the bank needs to be more directly empowered to have control over those things. So maybe it's as simple as these middleware platforms that were selling ledgers or sort of side cores, but their client was the fintech company. And they were saying, hey, this is for the fintech company. They're going to do it. Bank, we'll make sure you get your reporting, but like, you're not who we're worried about. Maybe it's as simple as we take that same technology, but we reorient it towards banks and say, this is the system of truth. This is a separate ledger or side core that the bank has control of. And the fintech company is sort of a secondary user of that. So maybe it's just sort of a repositioning and kind of restructuring of that model. Or maybe from a regulatory perspective, we get enough pushback from regulators that we see more significant changes on, I guess, the structure of how BaaS programs have been getting set up over the last 5 years. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of thoughts. First, I think I'm going to make you a T-shirt that says "ban FBOs," but with like an asterisk that like goes to a disclaimer to clarify your point of view.
That'll make me super popular on the conference circuit. Thank you.
I'm sure it will.
Yeah.
You'll make all sorts of new friends.
I really will.
I mean, one of the pieces of this that has both been stuck in my brain and I think may result in some unpleasant second, third order effects for other fintech companies just like totally unaffiliated with this disaster is we've already seen in both regulatory guidance and in specific enforcement actions discussion about banks doing proper due diligence and third-party risk management, including of the financial condition of their third parties.
Yeah.
Right? So my question for this specific situation is, were these four main banks, Evolve, American, Lineage, and AMG, did they assess Synapse's financial condition when they first started working with the company? Were they monitoring it on an ongoing basis? If no, why not? If yes, why didn't they adequately sort of prepare for the coming catastrophe, right?
Yeah.
If you looked at Synapse's books a year ago, absent them raising new funding, which is not a safe assumption for any company, it was if the company is not profitable and it's burning money, is that a vendor you want to have providing a core capability, right? So that's both a narrow question for like, how did this happen? And what, thinking a little bit forward to if there are enforcement actions, what topics might they touch on? And I think that's a very legitimate area to ask questions. But then the broader, potential negative knock-on impact is if I'm a bank and some cool new fintech wants to sell me some capability, it was already hard, right?
Yeah.
Talk to any bank, talk to any fintech that's trying to sell to banks.
They're
and
shocked
they will tell
by
you
the sales cycle. They're like, oh my God, this is the worst.
They will tell you about the sales cycle and the vendor management process and all of that.
Yeah.
I can only imagine now it's going to be, an order of magnitude worse if you're not able to demonstrate, hey, either we have funding to run for 5 years, is, or we're, highly confident based on our whatever, sales pipeline revenue growth that like, we are going to be able to go raise capital from our VCs again. And there's, there's very minimal risk of, us no longer existing because we just don't have enough money. So I think that's something, definitely to watch out for as far as what are the secondary, tertiary impacts of all of this.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And, it's interesting because before all of this happened, there was, I think, a lot of discussion that I think includes you and I about consolidation in the banking as a service space and among all of these infrastructure providers. And will they get acquired? Will they acquire each other? Obviously, we saw FIS by Bond. We saw Fifth Third by Rise. There's been a few others. And so we've seen some of that already. And I think for me at least, what I had assumed before was that consolidation would largely be driven by, hey, we just are out of runway and we need to get off the treadmill now. I wonder if now it'll be a little bit different in the sense that you might have some of these middleware providers that technically aren't out of runway. Like they have runway to go. They probably have decent prospects of being able to raise again. But the risk profile to their partners, to their banks, because they don't have a clear path to sustainable profitability, even though they're not out of money, might indicate that, hey, we can't work with you as you are, right? Even if we're relatively happy. And so I wonder if you might see some of the remaining middleware providers get snapped up by, larger vendors or entities in the space that could basically, the value they would provide to that middleware platform is, we will get you through all of the bank procurement and vendor management and third-party risk management processes, because we're like a black hole. We're not going anywhere. We're going to be around forever. There's zero question of our long-term prospects. We're regulated directly and supervised under the Bank Service Company Act. Shout out Kia Hazlitt. So there's really no need to worry. So maybe that might change the dynamic there. And I don't know. I mean, it'd be interesting for, I don't know, Jack Henry. I'm just making up names now, to look at acquiring someone who's more in a sort of semi-healthy position in sort of the old context and has happy customers and isn't at any immediate risk of anything breaking, but just goes to him and says, almost more like a merger than an acquisition in some senses, where it's like, look, long-term, what's the play here? Why don't we just do this now and we can all be better off? So the dynamics from an M&A perspective in this area might change based on what you're just describing. Speaking of BSCA, I think we were going to have t-shirts made around that too.
Yes. Yeah.
That would be another avenue that we could potentially see some activity on. Kia, our friend from Bank Nerd Corner and elsewhere, has started a little cold water on that for me, just based on some of the research she's done. Sounds like that might be a little trickier to actually leverage in this way. Apparently, there's a research paper coming out this fall that all of us bank nerds can't wait to read on the history of the BSCA and how it is applied. But I guess that's theoretically another avenue that regulators could look at as well.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like in some regards, the most intense portion of the storm has passed, in that, like, this bankruptcy is in process.
Yep. McWilliams
kind of
is
like,
here.
Like the sort of most salacious and scandalous headlines have maybe already come out. Who knows?
You're just trying to get transferred off BaaS Island. That's what you're doing right now.
Waffle Island. But the reality is, for the people who have their money locked up, who, as we're recording this, it's now been 18 days.
Oh my God.
It's certainly not over for them.
No.
And
to your point, again, your earlier point about reconciliation stuff, takes a long time. It might not be over for a while.
Yeah, I mean, shame on me, I guess, for not following like the FTX and BlockFi bankruptcies more closely. Obviously, like a lot of differences in those situations versus this situation. Particularly, and now I'm thinking of like the Celsius one as well. Here the end users are not considered unsecured creditors of the estate, which was the case in some of those, right? Where it's kind of like, you'll get your money back, but you're like at the end of the line behind everybody else.
Yeah.
Here, like the funds were, hopefully, segregated in these custodial accounts, these FBO accounts.
Yeah.
But the challenge of untangling these records, like, particularly because, as I understand it, on the Friday of that hearing, the most recent hearing, the remaining Synapse employees and contractors were all terminated. So I'm just like picturing in my head, like Elena McWilliams, like walking into an empty office and being like, okay, let's figure this out. And there's just like a password written on a sticky note or something. Like, I don't even know what that could possibly look like, but clearly she's not in there running like SQL queries and like exporting reports and trying to figure this out. So somebody, and this was also a point raised by Triple Point and SVB, it's like, well, somebody needs to pay for the Chapter 11. Chapter 11 is for an ongoing company. And
Yeah.
so, and we can kind of wrap it up here, otherwise I'll talk about it all day. But the judge, his logic in continuing as at 11 with a trustee was that it would give the trustee greater flexibility. And now we know it's Yelena McWilliams, if the decision is, there's no money to operate in an 11, the only option is to convert to a 7 and liquidate, she at least has the flexibility to make that decision.
Right.
But the point, and again, not a bankruptcy expert, this is not legal advice. The money to pay for the trustee, pay the trustee's attorney, pay whatever, I assume like forensic accountant type folks need to be involved in this.
Yeah.
That comes from the estate. But if the
Yeah.
estate, so what's left over from Synapse, has no money, like who's paying for it?
Yeah.
And right now, we don't know. So I guess I'll put a pin by saying like the next steps on the case are that the judge instructed that the trustee would file weekly status reports. I believe the first one of those should come out actually before this airs. I think it would be Friday the 31st, I think. And then the first status conference that would be like something that people could dial into or zoom into would be Friday the 7th of June. So I expect we will find out more then.
All right. Well, that is a good place to leave it. Mikula, we will, I promise, get you a transfer off this island at some point in the future.
Exfiltration is
yes,
what we're going to call it.
yes. We'll send some operatives to exfil you from BaaS Island. Make sure you're safe and that you can slip out at night when no one is watching. We appreciate your continued duty on there. A PSA for folks who want to dial in to the next call, please keep yourself on mute. That has been a surprising issue. I guess people aren't really used to being on conference calls anymore, but regardless, we will continue to watch with a great deal of interest. Can I interest you in a topic that has nothing to do with banking as a service, as far as I can tell?
Yes, please do.
Oh, okay, all right. So you probably saw a little while ago that Visa came out and made a bunch of product announcements across a wide range of different areas, everything from fraud and faster payments and pay by bank to tap to pay to something that they call the Visa Flex Credential, which is essentially a little thing that they cooked up in Japan for a bank in Japan and have decided to roll out sort of globally over time. The basic idea here is that it allows for the 16-digit card number to, in the words of Terry Angelos, who was previously the SVP of Fintech at Visa, and who did a great job summarizing this announcement, turns the card number into a pointer that can point anywhere. And so the idea basically is that instead of your card number being rigidly tied to one account and one source of funding for paying for whatever it is that you're buying, you can sort of programmatically decide where to point that card based on the circumstances of the transaction. So, for example, the theory is that if you had a debit card and you had a credit card and you wanted to, for the most part, use your debit card to buy stuff, but the credit card that you have gets you 5% cash back on groceries, well, then every time you go to a grocery store, you could use your debit card just like you normally would, but the actual money would come from your credit card, and you would get the cashback rewards every time you shopped at that grocery store. And the logic to route those transactions to the appropriate accounts would be something that would be managed at a mobile banking, mobile wallet, digital wallet interface level that the consumer sets on an individual basis, but giving them the convenience to use just one card in their wallet. So it's sort of an abstraction of the sort of wallet or interface layer relative to the physical cards or card numbers that a consumer might be using. And I've seen this discussed as a way to combine debit and credit, as I just described. Affirm has actually come out and said that their debit plus debit card product, which is a debit card with pay later functionality built into it, is something that's going to be, I think, rebuilt on top of this new Visa Flex Credential capability. And in fact, it sounds like Affirm is going to be partnering with other debit card providers to offer sort of a pay later sort of set of capabilities that those debit card providers can tie to their product if they want to offer a similar product to what Affirm has. I've seen lots of different interesting discussions about ways you could tie different products together. So this does seem like a pretty interesting unlock or piece of innovation. One thing that is unclear, though I think my initial analysis, I might have gotten this wrong, and so I want to just mention it real quick, is it's a little bit unclear at what level of the stack this capability works. And what I mean by that is, does this work at a network level, meaning that a consumer could have one Visa card that could route between different cards or different accounts at multiple issuers or financial institutions as long as they're on the Visa network? Or does it mean that this is a capability that exists on a bank by bank or issuer by issuer level, where JP Morgan Chase could create a sort of flexible mobile banking, mobile wallet experience that allows me to tie my different JP Morgan Chase payment accounts together? And so it's a little unclear. My initial assumption and reading of it was that it was more of a network level play. As I've dug into it more, it seems like, and the way Visa is talking about it, is that it's more of a bank or issuer level, which would actually candidly make a lot more sense for Visa. I think a consumer would prefer, I certainly would, to be able to have the ability to go across multiple banks. And I think that would unlock a much richer set of functionality. I think it would also potentially be more beneficial to merchants. But Visa and MasterCard, their number one customer is the credit card issuers. And so I don't think the credit card issuers would like the cross-network functionality. And so just based on an assumption of what Visa and MasterCard's incentives are, and obviously Visa in this particular case, I would think they'd be looking at this capability more on an issuer by issuer level. So Jason, you've been stuck on BaaS Island. You haven't probably gotten a chance to dig into this, but what's your sort of reaction to that?
I mean, the first thing it reminded me of, and I guess this makes sense in retrospect, was the Affirm Debit Plus offering, right?
Yeah.
So the ability, and I actually hate this, what is it, a portmanteau, where you cram two different words together.
Yes.
The idea of a credit card, which...
Jason, I hated that as soon as you said that. I was like,
it just sounds bad. It sounds like some sort of pest you need to exterminate.
It does.
But the idea that, like, okay, particularly for BNPL providers, as they've tried to move from online e-com, where the UX of using buy now, pay later in a digital setting tends to be very pleasant and seamless, to trying to conquer, bricks and mortar, where we've seen all sorts of like funky attempts. I mean, I'm laughing because this just struck me as like bananas on every level. Like Affirm's integration, so to speak, with Walmart was like apply ahead of time online, print out a paper, or like bring your phone with a barcode on it to have the cashier scan it.
That's right.
And like, what person is ever going to do that? Or you're going to have such a weird negative select bias that only like really desperate people do it. And then like your credit quality is probably going to, suffer for that. So like Affirm's, I don't know if they're still calling it Debit Plus, but like that product was interesting because it sort of like gave you the ability to either say, okay, I swipe this card, and then after the fact, I can either choose to have it as some sort of BNPL plan with Affirm, or it would functionally sort of pass through to your underlying real bank account, your connected bank account. I always think of that as like decoupled debit, but I feel like Matt Janiga or somebody like told me why it's not decoupled debit, and I just keep forgetting the answer.
Payment nerds freak out when you
Yeah.
get decoupled debit
I
wrong,
know.
so just be careful there.
I try to stay away because it's like I can never remember the details, and
Right.
it's actually interesting when you were describing the idea of having like multi-issuer or multi-network support. I
Yeah.
forget if this company ever launched in the US, but there was a UK company called Curve.
Yeah.
And the idea was, I think, literally exactly what you're saying, where it's like, I have my Curve card, which is like, uh, whatever, aggregation of like all my
Yeah.
other cards. And
Yeah.
it would allow you to do things like after the fact, like, oh, I bought this on my Chase debit and I have a Capital One credit. And it would somehow allow you to, after the fact, sort of move where that transaction happened. My understanding is what we're talking about now with a Flex Credential is not quite that level of like confusing sophistication. And to your point, um, given that Visa's customer is, the issuing bank, not the end
Yeah.
consumer, if
Yeah.
I'm Chase, maybe I'm totally fine letting somebody sort of point their card at a checking account or at a credit account. I definitely don't want them pointing their card at like some other bank. Like, no,
No.
I'm
No.
not going to
No.
sign up for that.
No.
So this is interesting. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what gets built on top of this capability. I do imagine it's going to revolve around this sort of like combination, like credit debit type product. I mean, the original idea for One, and then the founder of One went on to start another company that was functionally the same idea, Nirvana Money, Bill
Yeah.
Harris,
Yeah.
was basically this idea of one balance that is like checking, savings, and credit as like a single product or a single account. Um, Obviously, things have changed since it's now Walmart JV and Nirvana sort of never really launched.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's it's interesting to see like new core capabilities be built, and then how those end up being used in the wild. Uh, Time will tell.
It will. It will indeed. Yeah. I mean, I think there are some interesting use cases on the margins that we'll probably discover. Like another one I've seen discussed a little bit in the ether is the idea of being able to tie tax advantaged accounts into this, right? Where it's like,
Mhm.
hey, I have an HSA. The problem with HSAs is that that debit card ends up in a drawer, or I don't use it, or it's inconvenient because I can only use it for qualified expenses. Would there be a way through this functionality? And there's probably some changes that have to happen at the point of sale to enable enough granularity for the rules to kind of kick in. But would there be a way to make tax advantaged accounts, whether it's an ABLE account or an HSA or an FSA or whatever, to make those accounts more functional by being able to point to them programmatically when you can draw from those accounts? So I could see some things like that kind of popping up on the margins and maybe potentially unlocking some spend from some
That's
of
interesting.
these
I mean,
areas.
it's the same kind of challenge with SNAP benefits or EBT, right?
Right,
Where
right,
you're
right.
at this point of sale and it's like, oh, well, you can buy these 10 things using whatever FSA
Yeah,
money or
yeah,
EBT SNAP money, but here's like 5 things you can't buy. And I have to imagine the way that that actually happens right now is like a person basically just does 2 transactions where they like
that's right.
buy one set of stuff, swipe card one, buy second thing of stuff, swipe card two, which
Yeah,
I mean I guess works, but is janky and inefficient.
yeah. No, it is. It is. And it even, I mean, I think it introduces friction that's sort of embarrassing to the customer, which is a topic we're going to revisit at the end of this podcast, just as a little tease. But yeah, I think that just ways to kind of make that smoother. It's smart, right? I think this is a smart move on Visa's uh, behalf. I really wish they had enabled this, and maybe they did. I don't think so, but I really wish they'd enabled this at a network level, because then we would have seen some bananas stuff happen. And I think it actually would have been smart for Visa broadly in terms of trying to kind of stay in control of the network and create as much value on the network as possible. But it probably just wasn't a workable option with their issuing banks. So I can see why they might want to back away from that. Mr. Mikula, as long as we're in the sort of general realm of buy now, pay later and credit cards, do we have time for one more quick story?
Yeah, for sure. I actually had a limited amount of brain space to try to pay attention and digest the CFPB's interpretive guidance, which got a lot of interesting commentary on Twitter for essentially classifying Pay in 4 BNPL as a quote unquote credit card. I do think that folks kind of maybe got hung up on some of like the nomenclature as opposed to sort of understanding like what the interpretive guidance actually does.
Yeah.
Apparently, and this was news to me, and I'm a TILA aficionado, but I did not know this. TILA, I can't keep a straight face.
No, that's another t-shirt idea. That's another t-shirt idea. I'm just saying.
Yes. You already have merch, but maybe we need some like co-brand between us merch, like
There's a whole other
Tila
category.
aficionado. At any rate, Tila defines credit card as, quote, any card, plate, coupon book, or other credit device existing for the purpose of obtaining money, property, labor, or services on credit. And so basically what the CFPB has done here is say, buy now, pay later, and this is specifically the pay in 4 variety, not longer term interest bearing installment loans. Under this definition of credit card in TILA is considered a credit card. However, buy now, pay later, pay in 4 variety would not be considered revolving or open-ended credit. So without the limited time we have left, not going to unpack all of the different parts of TILA and its implementing regulation, Reg Z. But there are some pieces that the interpretive guidance says will apply here. And those primarily center around some of the consumer protection aspects, like obligating BNPL providers to handle disputes, process things like returns and refunds in a certain way, provide statements and disclosures. So those are the main components. Some of the stuff when people think about TILA Reg Z, and particularly credit cards, they think about, oh, well, there's a requirement to underwrite ability to repay. That does not apply here. Like that is not in play. Some other things that have come up in the course of this conversation around the guidance has been, what about requiring BNPL providers to either use credit bureau data as part of underwriting or furnish to credit bureaus? The new phrase, which I guess is okay, is phantom debt. And that
I've
if you
heard
don't,
that.
if you don't require BNPL providers to furnish, you have this, quote unquote, phantom debt. Now, there is no regulatory authority to mandate furnishing to the bureaus. Even if it wanted to, the CFPB can't do that. Other bank regulators can't do that. Interestingly, there was a split here with a firm, at least as I recall noticing it, being supportive of the guidance. And Klarna being much more critical. I actually pulled up Klarna CEO Sebastian Siemiatkowski's tweet on this matter. And he said, there's a fundamental difference between BNPL and credit cards. BNPL has no interest, no revolving. Our model relies on customers paying us back. 99% of Klarna's payments are repaid with a default rate of less than 1%, blah, blah, blah. I'd point out that nothing he's arguing here really has much to do with the interpretive guidance, because the interpretive guidance doesn't talk about underwriting, ability to pay, or furnishing. So that kind of feels like maybe a little bit of misdirection. How did this interpretive guidance land in your neck of the woods?
Oh, well, in Fintech Takes, we were too tired to read the interpretive guidance. I only have some surface level thoughts. I mean, I think it was pretty clear for a while. This kind of goes to the whole, like, are you going to go where regulators are going to end up anyway, or are you going to sort of fight it along the way? I think it was pretty clear that the CFPB in particular thinks buy now pay later is credit, and you can do whatever you want to do with. I mean, the original design of paying for products and trying to sort of skirt some of this stuff, but the reality is it is a credit product. Now, is it different than a credit card? Of course, it's different than a credit card. It is very different than a credit card in a number of ways. I could argue some good ones and some bad ones. I actually have a summit that I'm going to be doing in June on buy now pay later, where we are going to be having some of these arguments. And so, we will be able to legislate some things like phantom debt in a little bit more detail. But in general, I think it makes sense to start from the perspective of what things do we think are fair to do with consumers as it relates to consumer protections for credit cards, and start from the perspective of probably those things should apply to buy now, pay later, unless there's a very good reason that they don't. And I think, like just using one example, disputes, like you can't offer a credit product that's used transactionally in a similar fashion to credit cards and not have a process for handling disputes, right? That's just not going to work, right? And so Affirm has a process for handling disputes. Klarna has a process for handling disputes. Afterpay, Zip, so on and so forth. Like everyone who's in this space, Apple, they all have a process for handling disputes. They all have a process for chargebacks and returns. It's a little bit more complicated. You have to sort of build your own rule book for doing it relative to what the network rules that Visa and MasterCard have. So you have to kind of invent your own playbook. But yeah, I mean, I think anyone who's been looking at this probably should have known that directionally this is where we were going to end up. Some of the stickier issues, to your point, are things that fall outside of this around underwriting and ability to pay. That's something actually that I think the UK has been addressing more with buy now, pay later around affordability. So we're a little bit kind of behind the curve on that in the US. Reporting to the bureaus, which, as you say, my take on the bureau thing, and I'm going to have a much richer discussion on this at my BNPL summit in June, is no one would furnish data to the bureaus today because everyone today realizes that data is really valuable, and no one wants to just be in the business of giving data away for free in order to buy it back from someone else. And so, all things being equal, no modern company is in the business of giving data to others to monetize. And so I think the bureaus just have sort of a difficult time convincing any newer companies that this is like absolutely in their best interest. I know they're trying to move in that direction, but it's tough. And then, Jason, one other quick take on this is I think this might be the sort of confirmation in a loose sense that buy now, pay later companies, if they are indeed sort of being lumped under credit cards from the CFPB's point of view, would this mean that they're going to be covered under the first sort of sweep of 1033 when the rule is finalized for transactional accounts?
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, not to call out Matt Janica twice. Matt, or John Pitts at Plaid would be my go-tos to answer that question. I mean, it was what? It was transactional accounts is defined by Reg E, Reg Z. If this is
it's Reg E and Reg Z. So it's credit cards, checking accounts, savings accounts, maybe EBT gets included, but this would suggest buy now, pay later.
It might. I'm not sure. And again, I guess maybe I'm not a TILA aficionado. I think there may be some variance in the fact that a typical credit card is open-ended and revolving, and it hinges on what is the definition of an account. So, like, I'm not sure if a pay in for BNPL is close-ended. I don't know if it would be included or not, but I'm going to ask some people after this.
Okay, well, you can report back to us on next month's episode. Jason, before I let you go, I thought we could do a combined Can't Let It Go today.
I actually have one that I'm going to add as well, but
oh, please do. Okay, so why don't you go first, and then I'll end with one that we both have a rant on.
Okay, so frequent listeners will no doubt be familiar with a company I've covered, Solo Funds. Very briefly, it is being sued by the CFPB for dark patterns and deceptive blah, blah, blah. That's not the part I can't let go of. The part I can't let go of is a tweet from the Solo Funds account, since deleted, that said, "This lawsuit feels selective," basically implying that they were being unfairly targeted and regulators were working to stifle innovation. And in that tweet, Solo Funds tagged Rohit Chopra, like his personal account, not the CFPB, Joe Biden, and Kamala Harris.
Wow.
Which
Okay.
that is one, I guess, regulatory strategy that I would not advise. So that is what I can't let go of. And I'll join. Yeah, you can do the joint one for both of us.
Well, that is a good one. That is a good one. I will just add very briefly that when they were doing their PR strategy, implementing that, I think their service was still not working
It's
for at
still
least
not
some of their
working
customers.
now.
So like, I mean, I'm not one to tell other companies how to prioritize what they're doing, but maybe fix that first. Tweet about how unfair things are second. I just a theory, just a thought, gently offered. Okay, let me do my can't let it go, which you can jump in on because I know you can't let this go either. I discovered that Revolut, everyone's favorite UK neobank, and not yet a UK bank charter holder. That's still an ongoing odyssey for them. They have implemented a step-up process for payment transactions that their customers are initiating, in which if Revolut considers it likely, very likely, I assume, that the transaction is fraudulent or that the customer is about to fall for a scam, they have implemented a new strategy for trying to, quote unquote, break the spell associated with these scams by requiring customers, in some cases, to create a sign that says, I understand I am about to be the victim of a scam. I understand I am unlikely to get my money back. And then to hold up that sign and take a selfie with it, like a hostage photo, and then submit that to Revolut. I swear I thought this was like a parody when I first saw it because even if there's some psychology or some sort of evidence that this might on the margins help, it's such a bad brand and marketing mistake. I mean, like the marketing folks at Revolut must just be like slamming their heads into their desks. Like, what the hell?
It's certainly a novel approach to trying to solve the authorized push
It
payment
is that.
fraud.
It is that. Yes, it is novel. I've never seen this before.
um, yeah, I mean, my reaction was, is this the best fintech can do?
Well,
Like,
no, it's not. It's not
no.
because like we've seen banks or fintech companies implement other strategies. Like, for example, you can check in certain banks' mobile apps as you're getting a call from a scammer that's pretending to be your bank, verifying that they are not, in fact, calling you and that it's a scam in real time.
Yeah.
Or there's work being done at like the technology level, at the OS level, being like, hey, in real time, we can analyze this call and notify you that this is likely a scam. Like there are way better, more seamless solutions to helping with this. I gotta say, I mean, like the thing about this that kills me is what is the percentage of false positives that you could save where you are confident enough as Revolut to make a customer go through all the steps because you're sure it's fraud, you're sure it's a scam, but it turns out to not be. So the person takes the selfie, they submit it, their account gets unlocked, they make the payment, and the payment was legitimate. What's the number of those transactions that you're saving versus just if you're this confident, just block the transaction, just don't let them do it? Like what's the margin between those two things? It has to be razor thin.
Yeah, it's an interesting decision. I will just leave my comments at that.
Awesome. Well, Jason, as always, a delight to podcast with you. Go get some sleep. Go try to find some shade under one of the remaining palm trees and rest. We'll hope to podcast with you again under slightly calmer circumstances. It certainly won't be resolved, but as always, thank you, and thank you for the wonderful work that you do.
Yeah, we'll see where things are next month.
All right. Talk to you later.